When Mabel Whitaker's two sons left her outside Mercy General with a pharmacy bag, a folded sweater, and $86.11 in cash, she believed their promise to come back before supper. Before that week ended, she would buy a flooded railroad depot for $9 because it was the only roof in Grayson County no developer wanted. 7 months later, a judge would hold Garrett Whitaker's records in her hand, forwarded bank statements, redirected Social Security letters, and a developer inquiry dated before his mother was abandoned, and the courtroom would go so quiet Mabel could hear rain ticking against the windows. But on that October evening, she knew only the sound of Garrett's SUV pulling away. Soft engine, expensive tires, no rattle, no cough, no shame. She was 74 years old. Her left hand still trembled from the small stroke she'd had in March of 2022, but her mind was clear enough to remember every word. "Just today, Mama," Garrett had said. Lowell, her younger son, had stood beside the curb with his hands in his jacket pockets. "We're handling the house." The house Mabel had lived in, that white clapboard house on Juniper Street for 43 years. Her late husband, Cal, had painted the porch ceiling blue every 6th summer because his grandmother said it kept wasps away. Mabel had sewn curtains for every window, hemmed prom dresses at the kitchen table, and raised 2 boys on hamburger gravy, library books, and paychecks that never quite reached Friday. By 5:40 that evening, the hospital doors slid open and closed behind her until the air smelled of disinfectant and rain. No one came. At 6:15, a nurse named Jenny brought her a paper cup of coffee. At 7:30, the security guard asked if she had a ride. At 8:05, Mabel called Garrett. Voicemail. She called Lowell. Voicemail. She called the number she still had for the house on Juniper Street. It rang once, then clicked dead. The rain had stopped, but the pavement shone under the ambulance bay lights. Mabel sat with her sweater over her knees and listened to a siren fade toward the river road. Inside the pharmacy bag were 3 prescriptions, a pair of reading glasses with 1 scratched lens, and the cash Garrett had pressed into her hand. 420s. 15. $1.11. Her Social Security went into an account Garrett had helped her simplify after the stroke. Her Medicare card was in her wallet. Her bank card was not. She did not cry on the bench. Mabel had spent 38 years sewing coat linings at the Bexley garment plant before it closed in 2008. She knew how to hold a seam together with one hand while the other fed fabric under a needle fast enough to blur. She knew that panic wasted thread. At 8:22, she stood. The night smelled of wet asphalt and ambulance exhaust. Her shoes pinched where her feet had swollen. She walked 3 blocks to the Crescent Motor Inn because it had a vacancy sign and a Coke machine outside. The room cost $49. The carpet smelled like old rain. The bedspread had cigarette burns along one corner. The television showed only 3 channels, all of them too loud. Mabel put the pharmacy bag on the dresser and set her folded sweater beside it. Then she locked the door, pushed the chair under the knob, and sat on the edge of the bed until morning. Her sons did not call the next day, or the next. On the 3rd morning, with $37.11 left, she went to the public library because it opened at 9 and had heat. The October light came through tall windows the color of weak tea. The radiator clicked and hissed along the back wall. Mabel sat at a computer and tried to log into her bank account. Password incorrect. She tried again. Locked. A woman shelved large print mysteries nearby. She had gray hair cut square at her jaw and a cardigan with pearl buttons. Her name tag read Ruth Bellamy. "You need help, honey?" Mabel looked at the screen. "I need my money." Ruth did not ask the wrong question first. She pulled up a chair and lowered herself into it with the care of someone whose knees had earned the right to complain. "What kind of money?" "Social Security." Ruth's hand paused over the keyboard. "Who gets the mail?" Mabel looked at her. Ruth nodded once. "Thought so." For 27 years, Ruth had worked the counter at the Grayson Falls post office. She knew how people disappeared on paper before they disappeared in real life. A changed mailing address, a new account, a son's signature, a daughter-in-law's neat handwriting. A widow told it was easier this way. Ruth printed 3 forms, one for Social Security, one for the bank, one for legal aid. Then she slid a county surplus notice across the table. "You need a roof tonight?" Mabel's mouth tightened. I need one I can keep. Ruth tapped the paper with one short fingernail. Then look here. The listing was 4 lines long. Former Grayson Falls Rail Depot. Flood damaged. No utilities confirmed. Sold as is. Minimum sealed bid, $9. Mabel stared at the address. She knew the depot. Everyone did. It sat at the end of Peach Street near the old spur line, 2 blocks from the river and 30 years from anything useful. The last passenger train had stopped there in 1976. In 2011, floodwater had reached halfway up the ticket windows and left a brown line across the brick like a scar. Since then, teenagers had broken the glass, raccoons had nested in the baggage room, and every developer in the county had taken one look at the mold reports and walked away. $9? Mabel said. Minimum bid. What's wrong with it? Ruth smiled without humor. Everything visible. That afternoon, Ruth drove her there in a 1998 Buick with one green door and a rosary hanging from the mirror. The depot stood behind a chain-link fence bent outward at one corner. Red brick, blackened along the bottom. Tall arched windows, with plywood over most of the openings. A platform roof sagging over cracked concrete. Weeds pushed through the rail bed, where tracks used to shine. The air smelled of river mud, wet leaves, and creosote baked into old timber. Mabel got out slowly. A freight train passed somewhere beyond the tree line, unseen but heavy, its horn low and mournful. The sound moved through her ribs. Her husband, Cal, had been a signal maintainer for the railroad from 1969 until his back gave out in 1998. He used to come home smelling of diesel, metal filings, and winter air. He had kept a brass switch key on his belt until the day he died. Mabel walked to the ticket window and touched the plywood. It's soaked, Ruth said. It's standing. The words came out before Mabel knew she had them. Ruth looked at her. Inside, the depot was worse. The waiting room floor buckled near the west wall. Mud had dried in ripples along the baseboards. Pigeons clattered in the rafters. The old benches were overturned. The ticket counter leaned forward like a tired man. A station clock hung above it, stopped at 6:17. Mabel stood beneath that clock. A shaft of late afternoon light came through a broken upper pane and fell across the dirty floorboards. Dust moved inside it, slow as breath. Ruth covered her nose with her sleeve. Mabel, I know. You sure? No. A pigeon shifted above them. Mabel looked at the waiting room, the ticket counter, the platform beyond the broken doors. She thought of the hospital bench, the motel carpet, the empty voicemails, the house on Juniper Street, with strangers walking through it, measuring walls. Then she opened her purse and counted 9 $1 bills onto the ticket counter. I've bought worse fabric. Ruth laughed once, then covered her mouth. The county accepted the bid because no one else had made one since 2014. Mabel received the deed on a Thursday morning. That night, she slept in the depot. Ruth brought a camping lantern, 2 jugs of water, and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She also brought a wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. Mabel dragged one of the old benches away from the wet wall and wiped it with paper towels. The wood was scarred, with initials, gum, and the dark half-moons left by decades of waiting hands. She lay down fully dressed. Rain began after midnight. It tapped through the broken roof, over the baggage room, and dripped into a metal trash can Ruth had found outside. Plink, plink, plink. Mabel watched the stopped clock above the ticket counter. 6:17. Cal had died at 6:17 in the morning on January 4th, 2019. She had been holding his hand when the nurse turned off the monitor. She had never told anyone the exact minute. Not Garrett, not Lowell. Some things belonged to the person who stayed. Near 2 in the morning, she got up. Her joints protested. Her left hand shook. She took the scarf from her neck, a faded blue one, with small white flowers, and tied it around the handle of the old waiting room door, where the brass knob had gone missing. The scarf hung there in the lantern light. Not a curtain, not much of anything. Still, it marked the place. There, she whispered. Now it had a handle. By dawn, Mabel had made a list on the back of her discharge papers. Water, heat, door, roof, bank, mail. 6 things. She could do 6 things. The first water came from the hand pump behind the freight shed. It took 43 hard pulls before brown water coughed out. then another 20, before it ran clear enough to see the bottom of a coffee can. Ruth took a sample to the county health office. It passed for outdoor use, not drinking. Good enough for cleaning. The first heat came from a kerosene heater donated by a man named Silas Boone, who ran the bus garage and had hands big enough to palm a dinner plate. Ruth had told him Mabel used to sew winter coats for half the town. She fixed my wife's wedding suit, Silas said. That was 1986, Mabel said. She still has it. He set the heater down. No charge. Mabel did not say thank you right away. She looked at the dented tank, the soot around the rim, the cracked rubber knob. Then she nodded. I'll clean it first. Silas smiled. Figured you would. The first money came from buttons. Not ordinary buttons. Railroad buttons. Mabel found them in a locked drawer beneath the ticket counter. Ruth opened it with a screwdriver and a butter knife after 15 minutes of muttering. Inside were ticket stubs, a moth-eaten cap, 3 brass uniform buttons stamped with the old Grayson and Eastern line, and a stack of envelopes tied with string. The buttons sold online for $72. Ruth handled the listing from the library computer. Mabel used the money for contractor trash bags, rubber gloves, bleach, a second-hand mop, weather stripping, and a prepaid phone. She bought a notebook for $1.29 and wrote every penny down. October 28th. Buttons sold. $72. 00. Trash bags. $11. 48. Bleach. For $19. Peanut butter. $2. 69. Balance. $53. 64. On the 5th day, a letter arrived at the depot. Not for Mabel. For Garrett Whitaker. Forwarding confirmation. Ruth found it stuck behind the warped mail slot, damp along one edge. Mabel stood in the waiting room while Ruth read it. Her face did not change. The depot smelled of bleach and wet paper. Somewhere in the wall, a mouse scratched. Garrett had changed her mailing address in September, 3 weeks before the hospital bench. Her bank statements, social security letters, house sale notices, and Medicare summaries had all been forwarded to his office on Lantern Pike. Ruth folded the letter carefully. This is evidence. Mabel took it. The paper trembled in her hand. He said he was helping. Ruth looked at the stopped clock. Some men call taking helping. Mabel put the letter in the notebook between pages of expenses. That was the first secret the depot gave her. There would be more. By the second week, people started leaving things outside the fence. A bag of canned tomatoes, a cracked mirror, 2 towels, a box of books from 1993, a church casserole in a glass dish with masking tape on the lid. Mabel did not like charity. She liked exchange. So she made a sign from cardboard and black marker. Mending done. Pay what you can. She hung it from the fence with Ruth's clothespins. The first customer was a waitress from Bev's Diner with a torn apron and red eyes. Her name was Lorna Pike. She was 56, divorced twice, and wore shoes with soles worn thin at the outside edges. Mabel stitched the apron by lantern light. Lorna left $3 and 2 sausage biscuits wrapped in foil. The next day, a man brought work pants. Then a girl brought a backpack strap. Then Silas brought 6 bus seat covers and said the district had no budget until January. Mabel charged him $20. Too low, he said. Then bring plywood. He did. Piece by piece, the depot changed. Not beautifully at first. Usefully. Plywood went over the broken lower windows. Plastic sheeting kept wind from the east wall. Silas patched the worst part of the platform roof with leftover tin from the bus garage. Ruth found a used microwave at a church rummage sale for $5. Lorna brought coffee grounds from the diner and a crate of bruised apples. Mabel scrubbed the waiting room floor until the old maple showed through in narrow golden lines. Under the mud, there was wood. Under the smell, there was air. Under the noise of pigeons, there was quiet. On November 12th, the first stranger came to sleep. Her name was Anita Ross. 62. Former bookkeeper. Arthritis in both hands. Her landlord had raised rent from $725 to $1,040 after new owners bought the building. She had slept 3 nights in her car behind the laundromat. She came in carrying a black trash bag and a purse with a broken strap. I heard you had heat, Anita said. Mabel was hemming bus seat vinyl under the lantern. 1 heater. I don't snore. I do. Anita almost smiled. Mabel pointed to the bench near the wall, now dry and covered, with 2 folded quilts. You can stay tonight. I can pay Friday. Pay by sweeping. Anita looked around the depot. The patched windows. The bucket under the baggage room leak. The ticket counter covered, with thread, receipts, and jars of buttons. This was a station. It still is. For what? Mabel bit off a thread. People changing trains. Anita stayed 1 night. Then a week. Then she began keeping the expense notebook because her handwriting was steadier than Mabel's, and her numbers were exact to the cent. That was how the waiting room became 2 women, then 3. The third was Della Marsh, a retired cafeteria cook, with a voice made rough by cigarettes she had quit in 2001. Della could stretch a chicken into soup, hash, broth, and sandwiches without making anyone feel poor. She brought a cast-iron pot and a radio that only played gospel and weather. The depot began to smell different. Coffee in the morning, bleach at noon, soup by 4, kerosene after dark, damp brick always, underneath everything, like a memory that refused to leave. On December 3rd, a county notice appeared on the fence. Unfit structure inspection scheduled. Mabel read it twice. The wind moved along Peach Street carrying the smell of river ice. Anita stood beside her. What happens if we fail? Mabel folded the notice. We don't. The inspection date was December 22nd. 19 days. They made another list. Roof leak. Front door lock. Electrical hazard. Fire safety. Sanitation. Occupancy. Proof of ownership. Water. Silas brought 2 smoke detectors and a battery-operated carbon monoxide alarm. Ruth called a legal aid attorney named Marisol Grant, who sounded young, but arrived with a leather folder thick enough to silence a room. Marisol looked over the deed, the surplus sale, the forwarding confirmation, and Mabel's notebook. Then she asked one question. Where is your Social Security going? Mabel looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at the floor. Garrett had become representative payee after the stroke. Temporarily, he had said. For convenience. The checks had continued coming, $1,312 a month. Mabel had received none of it since August. Marisol wrote the number down. Do you want it back? Mabel's left hand tightened around the edge of the ticket counter. The depot was quiet except for the heater ticking. Yes. 2 days later, Garrett called. Mabel let it ring 4 times. Then she answered. Mama. His voice was soft. Careful. The voice he used, with bankers and women at church. Where are you? You know, I heard things. So did I. A pause. Living in that building isn't safe. Neither was that bench. Another pause. Lowell came on the line. Mama, don't be difficult. Mabel looked at the station clock. 6:17. I'm busy. With what? She looked at Anita sweeping by the platform doors. Della stirring soup over the hot plate. Ruth at the table sorting mail into piles. Silas outside measuring the doorframe in the cold. With my life. She hung up. No one in the room clapped. No one said she had done well. Ruth simply slid a cup of coffee toward her. Della added a biscuit to the saucer. That was enough. The second secret came from the envelopes tied with string. Anita opened them while organizing the ticket drawer. Most were old freight claims, water-stained and useless. One envelope was heavier than the others, sealed with brittle tape, and marked Platform Trust, Do Not Discard. Inside was a ledger from 1948. The pages smelled of dust and iron. Names ran down the columns in blue fountain pen. Railroad widows, injured brakemen, porters' families. Small amounts paid out over years. $6, $14, $21. At the back was a deed restriction. The depot and platform parcel had been donated for public transit, public waiting, or public relief. If abandoned, it could be transferred only for a public benefit use. It could not be sold for private development, without a court hearing and public notice. Marisol read it at the ticket counter under the lantern. Then she read it again. Ruth leaned closer. What does that mean? Marisol smiled for the first time. It means someone at the county missed this. Mabel touched the ledger with one finger. Who wanted it? Marisol's smile disappeared. Garrett's firm filed an inquiry in July. The room settled around that fact. Della turned off the burner. The soup stopped bubbling. Outside, a truck passed slowly on Peach Street, tires hissing through slush. Garrett had not simply abandoned her. He had planned around her. The house, the benefits, the depot, the land. All of it had lines running through his office. Mabel did not speak for a long time. Then she took the ledger, wrapped it in a dish towel, and placed it in the microwave because it was the only thing in the depot with a door that shut tight. Ruth watched her. "That's your safe?" "For now." The inspection came on a cold, bright morning. December 22nd, 2022. The sky was the pale blue of cheap china. Frost silvered the platform boards. Inside, the depot smelled of coffee, lemon cleaner, and Della's cornbread. The inspector arrived at 9:10 in a county truck, with salt on the fenders. His name was Mr. Havel. He wore a navy coat and carried a clipboard. He stopped just inside the waiting room. Mabel stood behind the ticket counter, with her notebook open. Anita sat at the table, with receipts sorted by date. Della wiped her hands on an apron. Ruth stood near the door. Silas waited outside by the patched platform roof, pretending not to listen. Mr. Havel looked at the benches, with quilts folded square at the ends. The fire extinguisher mounted by the door. The smoke detector blinking red above the old schedule board. The clear path to the exit. The sealed windows. The labeled water jugs. The hand-washing station made from a camping basin and gray water bucket. "This is occupied?" "Yes," Mabel said. "How many?" "3 tonight." "For sometimes." "You operating a shelter?" "No." "What are you operating?" Mabel looked at the station clock. Still stopped. "A waiting room." Mr. Havel looked at her. She held his gaze. "People wait here until they have somewhere safer." He wrote something. The inspection lasted 52 minutes. He found problems. Of course he did. The bathroom plumbing did not work. The electrical panel needed professional evaluation. The baggage room was not safe for sleeping. The platform railing needed repair. No open flame could be left unattended. Drinking water had to be certified or delivered. Mabel wrote each item down. When he finished, Mr. Havel closed his clipboard. "I came prepared to post this building." Mabel's mouth went dry. "But I'm issuing a correction order instead. 30 days. Ruth exhaled. Della crossed herself. "Mr. Havel looked at the old benches, the clean floor, the women standing in coats, because the heat was still thin. "My mother waited 6 months for senior housing," he said quietly. "She slept on my sister's couch." No one answered. He took a paper from his clipboard and set it on the ticket counter. "Here's the water delivery contact." Then he left. Silas came in after the truck pulled away. "Well," Mabel handed him the list. He read it. 30 days. 30. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. "Then we start with the bathroom." By January, the depot had hot water twice a day from a donated tank, a working toilet, and a legal letter taped to the ticket window explaining its temporary emergency use. Marisol filed papers to restore Mabel's Social Security control. Ruth delivered certified copies herself, wearing red lipstick like armor. Garrett filed for guardianship on January 18th. The petition said Mabel Whitaker was vulnerable, confused, financially reckless, and living in hazardous conditions. It said her sons were concerned. The hearing took place February 9th at the county courthouse. The hallway smelled of floor wax and wet wool. Mabel wore her navy dress, with the mended sleeve and Cal's brass switch key on a chain under the collar. Her left hand shook, so she kept it folded inside her right. Garrett arrived in a charcoal suit. Lowell arrived late. Neither looked at the women from the depot. Inside the courtroom, Garrett's attorney spoke first. He mentioned the stroke, the depot, the lack of conventional housing, the risk, the family's concern. Concern had a smooth sound in that room. Then Marisol stood. She placed Mabel's notebook on the table. Receipts, dates, repairs, water deliveries, fire safety purchases, bank forms, social security documents, certified mail. Then Ruth testified. She gave exact dates. September 14th, address change. October 3rd, hospital discharge. October 7th, Mabel located at library. October 11th, depot deed issued. Anita testified. She explained the books, the budget, the correction order, the compliance steps. Della testified. She brought photographs of the kitchen station, the food log, the donated meals, the cleaning schedule. Mr. Havel testified last. Garrett's attorney objected once. The judge allowed it. Mr. Havel said the building had been unsafe. Yes. He said it was improving. He said Mabel had followed every correction order. He said, in his professional opinion, the depot was less dangerous than a woman sleeping outside Mercy General in October. The courtroom went still. Mabel did not look at her sons. She looked at the judge. Then Marisol submitted the forwarding confirmation, and the payee records, and the developer inquiry. Garrett's face changed by inches. Not enough for strangers to notice. Enough for Mabel. She had seen that face at 7 years old, over a broken lamp, at 16 over a dented fender, at 48 when he told Cal he had no time to visit before surgery. The old face. Caught, but not sorry yet. The judge denied guardianship. Not gently. She denied it on the record. Then she ordered a full accounting of every Social Security payment Garrett Whitaker had received as representative payee since August. She froze his access to Mabel's benefits before he could leave the courthouse. She appointed an independent reviewer from the county clerk's office and gave Garrett 30 days to produce bank statements, receipts, transfers, and explanations. Garrett's attorney stood too quickly. Your Honor. No, the judge said. One word. It landed harder than a gavel. The judge also ordered Garrett not to contact Mabel except through counsel for 60 days. Lowell was not named in the financial order, but the judge looked at him long enough that he lowered his eyes. It was not thunder. It was not revenge. It was a paper sliding across a bench, a stamp pressed down, a woman's name returned to herself. Quiet justice had a sound. Ink drying. Outside the courthouse, Lowell stood near the steps, with his hands in his coat pockets. Mama. Mabel stopped. Traffic hissed on the wet street. Somewhere a bell rang noon. Lowell looked thinner than she remembered. I didn't know all of it. Mabel watched a drop of water fall from the courthouse awning. You knew enough. He swallowed. Can I come see you? At the depot? If you'll let me. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, bring your own broom. He nodded once. Garrett did not speak to her. 2 weeks later, the accounting arrived in a manila envelope, so thick Ruth had to open it with kitchen scissors. They read it at the ticket counter. Garrett had used Mabel's benefits for pharmacy copays, yes. Groceries, twice. But there were other lines too. A $1,400 cashier's check marked consulting. A $650 payment to a title office. 3 restaurant charges in the city. A wire transfer for $2,200 to an account Mabel had never seen. At the bottom, the independent reviewer had written one number in black ink. Amount owed, $7,846. 22. Mabel stared at it. Della turned off the soup burner. Ruth took off her glasses. No one spoke for a while. Then Mabel folded the letter along its crease and placed it inside her notebook. What now? Anita asked. Mabel picked up her needle. Now he pays it back. The court ordered repayment in monthly installments, with the first due before April 1st. Garrett was removed as representative payee permanently. The developer inquiry became part of the public file. By May, his firm had withdrawn from the Peach Street project. By June, he had sold the lake boat he used to polish every Sunday morning, while his mother waited for return calls. Mabel never saw the boat. She only saw the first repayment check. $500. The envelope arrived with no note. She endorsed it at the bank, bought roofing tar, 2 pillows, a bus pass for Tasha, and a cherry pie from Bev's Diner. Then she wrote every penny down. Only after that did the depot get its name. Not from Mabel, from Della. She wrote it on butcher paper and taped it above the ticket counter. Platform House. Under it, in smaller letters, wait here. Keep going. The phrase stayed. The repairs kept happening, but not in a way anyone would have called grand. A wire got tucked behind old trim. A railing stopped wobbling. Mail found its way into the old ticket cubbies, with names written on blue painter's tape. What changed the depot was smaller. One rainy Thursday, Mabel sat beside Tasha at the donated Singer from 1974. The machine smelled of warm dust and old oil. Rain tapped the platform roof, while the needle rose and fell through a torn denim jacket. Tasha kept both hands stiff on the fabric. Guide it slow, Mabel said. I'll ruin it. Then we pick it out. Tasha looked at her, then back at the seam. The stitch wandered at first. Then it straightened. Mabel did not praise her. She only slid another torn sleeve across the table and let the girl begin again. The depot became what stations had always been before people forgot. A place between one life and the next. There were rules. No drugs inside. No stealing. No shouting after 10. Everyone signs the book. Everyone does a chore. Everyone keeps their own papers in their own folder. No one gives a son, boyfriend, niece, pastor, banker, or helpful stranger control of a check without a second pair of eyes reading the form. That last rule was Mabel's. She wrote it herself. In April, the county approved Platform House as a temporary warming and referral site under a nonprofit sponsor Marisol helped create. It was not a miracle. It was paperwork, inspections, arguments, donated labor, and a roof that still leaked during hard rain. But it was legal. It was real. On May 6th, Mabel's restored Social Security deposit arrived in her own account. $1,312. She walked to the bank herself, signed her own name, and asked for the receipt to be printed instead of emailed. Outside, she stood under the awning and read the balance twice, while traffic hissed through spring rain. Then she folded the receipt into her notebook. By June, the repayment checks came on schedule, each envelope plain, each one entered into Mabel's notebook. Mabel heard that from Lowell, who came every Saturday at 8, with coffee, work gloves, and very little to say. He cleaned gutters, hauled trash, painted trim, and once stood in the baggage room, with his forehead against the wall for nearly a minute. Mabel let him. Some remorse needed privacy. One evening in August, when the air smelled of cut grass and hot brick, Lowell brought a paper bag of peaches and set them on the ticket counter. I should have come back. Mabel threaded a needle. Yes. I was ashamed. Yes. He waited for more. She gave him none. After a while, he picked up a broom. By October 2023, 1 year after the hospital bench, the station clock still read 6:17. Silas said he could fix it. Mabel said not yet. That evening, Platform House served supper on the old concrete platform. Folding tables ran under the repaired roof. Della made chicken and dumplings. Tasha passed biscuits. Ruth sorted mail into cubbies before eating because old habits were stronger than hunger. There were 19 people at the tables. Not all residents. Some former. Some volunteers. Some simply lonely and willing to wash dishes. Mabel sat at the end nearest the tracks, with Cal's brass key warm against her chest. The sunset turned the rails copper, where weeds had not swallowed them. A train horn sounded far off, beyond the river bend. The old platform trembled faintly, remembering. After supper, Silas climbed a ladder beneath the clock. Mabel stood below him. The faded blue scarf was still tied to the waiting room door, soft at the edges now, from every hand that had used it. "You ready?" he asked. She looked around. At Ruth laughing with Della over paper plates. At Anita showing a new resident how to label a benefits folder. At Lowell sweeping crumbs from between platform boards. At Tasha teaching a little girl to knot thread. At the ticket counter, polished now by hands coming and going. Mabel nodded. Silas opened the clock face. The glass was cloudy, scratched, and beautiful. He wound the mechanism with a small brass key from his pocket. Something clicked deep inside. The minute hand shuddered. Then it moved. 6:18. No one cheered at first. They simply heard it. Tick. Then again. Tick. The sound filled the old depot carefully, as if entering a room where people were sleeping. Mabel put her hand on the ticket counter. For 4 years, the clock had held the minute Cal left. For 1 year, it had watched Mabel begin again. Now it moved, because the room was no longer waiting for the past to release it. Ruth came to stand beside her. "Looks different running." Mabel watched the hands. "No," she said. "It looks honest." Outside, the last light caught the rails. Inside, the clock kept time. And for once, nobody in that old waiting room was waiting alone.